Hello, everybody, and great that you're joining this IUSSP webinar on innovations in data infrastructure for the longitudinal study of international migration. I am Nico van Nimwegen, and I'm the Secretary General of the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Council of the IUSSP. And as you know, the IUSSP is the worldwide network of population scientists. And if you're not yet a member, you should definitely consider to join us. There are a great many reasons to join IUSSP, but I will just name one, and that is our upcoming International Population Conference that will convene next year in Brisbane, Australia. And I always refer to this International Population Conference of the IUSSP as the Olympics of demography, and it's certainly worth your while to join us there. Now, the call for paper for this conference opens in May, so keep an eye on our website to join to submit your paper there. We realize that Brisbane is a long trip, a long travel for most of us, but remember, our conference is the chance of a lifetime for you to make that trip. We will have a very exciting program. So check our website and join us there if you can. Now, back to business of today. It's good to know that the core of the scientific program of the IUSSP is carried out by our scientific panels. We have 15 of them, and they cover the broad field of interdisciplinary population studies. They are member-driven, and all IUSSP members can suggest topics for new panels. These panels develop their own work program, and other members can participate, for instance, through events like this current webinar. So let's go back to the real business now. So today's webinar is organized by our panel on lifetime migration, and the Council is very grateful to the organizers, more in particular Sergi Vidal, the co-chair of the panel, and the moderator of today, Claudia Brunori, and of course, the panelists that will start the discussion. We'd like to thank them all, but also would like to thank Paul Monet of the IUSSP Secretariat, without whom this webinar, like any other webinar in the IUSSP, would not have been possible. So now over to you, Claudia, and good luck.
Okay, thank you very much, Nico, for the welcome and introduction. I am Claudia Brunori, and Sergi Vidal from SED and Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona in Spain will introduce the webinar, and he's also the co-chair of the IUSSP Scientific Panel on Lifetime Migration. We have 4 panelists with us today. We have Aliakbar Akbaritabar from the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research in Germany, who will talk about his experience with digital trace data to follow migration populations, especially with using the Scholarly Migration Database. We have Marcela Cerruti from the Centro de Estudios de Población in Argentina, who will talk about the project of the World Migration Survey. We have Nicola Sander from the Federal Institute for Population Research, who will talk about her experience using panel surveys to follow migrants through migration and remigration in the German Emigration and Remigration Panel Study. And finally, we have Rosa Weber from Stockholm University and INED in France, who will talk about her experience using linked cross-national registered data, especially the linked registered data between Sweden and Finland. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And then the webinar will be structured in 3 parts. We will first have a brief introduction by Sergi Vidal on the IUSSP panel on lifetime migration and the scope of the webinar. We will have a round of brief presentations of the data sources by our panelists. And then we will have 2 sets of discussion. First, we will talk about the challenges and limitations that came with the specific projects that the panelists work on. And then we will discuss on how we can expand the scope of data infrastructures following migrants as in their life course experience of migration. Finally, we will have about 20 minutes of Q&A. In which all the attendees are warmly welcome to ask questions. You will be able to type your questions in the question and answers part on the Zoom platform. Please scroll and see if someone else already asked a similar question. You can upvote questions if you would have a similar question. And I will read the questions and give them to the panelists. So thank you very much. Sorry again for the technical issue, and Sergi, the floor is yours.
So hello and welcome everybody. And thank you to the IUSSP for making this event possible, and the facilitator Claudia and the panelists as well for being here today. And before moving to this conversation with the panelists, I just want to give you some context to this event and to talk about the importance of longitudinal migration data. That's data that tracks individuals over time or that reconstruct individual migration trajectories within and across countries. So in social science research, the collection of longitudinal data has increased dramatically since the 1990s, and it has become a standard design because of the advantages in measuring and modeling dynamic social processes. And while migration is one of such dynamic processes, we see limited longitudinal elements in data infrastructure. So the event today showcases recent progress that contributes to a change on that deficit, with panelists discussing today on data sets that are illustrative of the different sources of longitudinal migration data, being that surveys, registers, or digital traces. Well, so there are multiple aspects that make longitudinal data important for migration research. And of course, I just can tackle a couple of them. I'm not going to be exhaustive here. First of all, we could argue that longitudinal designs are better positioned to predict who migrates at a point in time and explain the consequences of migration or being a migrant. And concretely, measures of the conditions and situations of the certain persons of origin at the destination are critical for our assessment of what determines migration and what changes after that. And it is so because, to a lesser or larger extent, migrants are not random samples of the population, but they are selected on a range of features. And knowing about the distribution of these features at origin sheds more light on the sources of selectivity. And it follows that the modeling of longitudinal data contributes to our understanding of outcomes or consequences by dissociating the role of migration from that of the selective features of migrants. So this also applies to the examination of how migrants' outcomes evolve over time when examining integration in host societies. And here we would need to address the selectivity of migrants deciding to stay in the host society and not moving back or forward to another country instead. So this leads me to another relevant aspect, which is that migration can be repeated over a lifetime. And we have some estimations suggesting that about 25% of worldwide migrations are return migrations, or 10% are transit migrations between two countries that are not involving the country of birth. So repeat migration is not trivial, but this is perhaps not well reflected in aggregate indicators of migration flows. And perhaps here longitudinal data could be used to adjust some of these existing indicators. But it could also be used to elaborate complementary cohort-specific indicators that address temporal effects or changes in the timing of migration, as it has been proposed by Akbaritabar. Also, the non-trivial levels of repeat migration point to the fact that migrant stocks in a point in time are not homogeneous populations, because they display heterogeneous migration histories. So reconstructing individual histories and the context of their lived experiences are critical to understand the diversity and complexity within migration narratives, including the frequency, direction, and life stage of migration, and the motivations and life circumstances driving each move, and how these open or limit opportunities in life, so that we can gain insight into the long-term impacts of past migrations and assess whether these impacts can be modified or mitigated over time. So just to conclude, I would like to mention that the IUSSP panel on lifetime migration, which is the one organizing this event, we're supporting research that conceptualizes and analyzes migration as a life course trajectory. And in particular, we seek to recognize the heterogeneity of migration behavior over individual lives and across diverse populations, also integrating internal and international migration over the life course, and assessing impacts on individual life chances and societal well-being. So we're organizing a range of in-person and online trainings and scientific events, and I encourage you to visit the IUSSP website for more information on upcoming events. So thank you again. I hope you enjoy the conversation today. And Claudia, I give you back the stage.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sergi, for the presentation introduction. So I think now we can move to the presentation by the panelists. I think, Rosa, you can go first.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rosa Weber. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Stockholm University and the French Institute for Demographic Studies. And I will talk today about linked Finnish and Swedish register data, which I have worked on in collaboration with Jan Saarela from Åbo Academy University, who compiled this data set together with Dan Olof Ruth. So the motivation behind this data set is that most of the empirical evidence on migration so far is based on single country data, but migration and integration are inherently extending beyond the national context. So focusing solely on one country provides a partial understanding of these dynamics. And this is where the linked data come in that provide us with a two-country perspective on migration to understand motives for migration, impacts on migrant careers, regional spillover effects, among others. So where we have really information from before and after the move, and potentially information on repeated moves. Another important aspect that this data provide, being register data, they really provide full population coverage, which is really important for understanding migrant selection into moving, returning, onward migration, circular migration, for instance. So to really assess who are the people who are moving. So regarding the structure, these data were constructed by integrating records of Finnish immigrants in Sweden from Swedish and Finnish population registers. The data were linked using unique personal identity numbers, or so-called PINs, that all of these registers have. But these PINs differ across the Nordic countries. And so here an important aspect was that in the Nordic countries, actually the taxation authorities also cooperate. So they let each other know when somebody shows up in the Swedish register and has not deregistered in the Finnish population register. So there are some rules and regulations of when one should register and deregister, and there are many incentives that really make this happen. So for instance, you need a PIN for a lot of things in the Nordic countries: to rent an apartment, to get a bank account, and so on. So there are high incentives for individuals to register, but also on top of this, the taxation authorities let each other know when somebody appears in their register. So this leads to quite good accuracy in terms of the matching rates. We have data that are matched with full accuracy and that contain the full population, with some restrictions here, because there were some specific rules at this time from Statistics Finland that did not allow the full population to be covered in any Finnish register data sets. So the data in Finland were reduced to a 77.5% random sample. So still quite a substantial part of the population. We have longitudinal information on quite a rich set of demographic and socioeconomic indicators covering the period 1987 to 2005. And migration is registered by this registration and deregistration that I talked about earlier. And with this link, having information from both Sweden and Finland, when we analyze moves between those two countries, we can also use the data set to assess to what extent people show up once they have moved, to what extent we can observe their income and so on in Sweden when they have left Finland. And doing these kinds of assessments, we see that really 99%, or quite a high share of individuals who have, for us, moved from Finland do show up then in Sweden. So the contribution of these data is that it allows us to take a two-country perspective to study migration and integration. So especially considering that new forms of migration that Sergi also talked about, including temporary, circular, cross-border migration, it is really very important to kind of understand and to link migrants' experiences in the sending and receiving country before and after migration, and to incorporate return migration into this framework. It also allows us to gain a better understanding of selection processes in migration, which is important for understanding long-term integration. For instance, as this has been shown to be strongly impacted by selective outmigration, so really who is in the country depends if a lot of people return. And it can help us gain insight into intended and unintended consequences of institutions and policies governing migration by having this two-country perspective, so to understand a bit better heterogeneity observed in migration and integration experiences.
Thank you very much, Rosa, for the presentation. I think, Ali, you're next.
Hi, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining. I hope you are seeing my slides right. So I'm Ali, short for Aliakbar, Akbaritabar, and I am a Max Planck, a postdoc, a research scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research. What I'm going to do today is to give an introduction to the scholarly migration database that is produced and maintained in Migration and Mobility Lab of the Department of Digital and Computational Demography at the Max Planck Institute. This is a collaboration with multiple colleagues. The core team members of SMD includes Tom Tyler and Emilio Zagani, and we have multiple collaborators who have contributed to this project in different capacities. So where did SMD start from, and what is the main contribution, and why do we need a new database? So a lack of high resolution and longitudinal data on migration of scholars worldwide, and the unprecedented opportunity to repurpose scientific publications metadata that spans more than 25 years. This was the lack that we observed and the opportunity that bibliometric data offers to address this. So what do is we take the data that comes from Scopus, Elsevier's Scopus, and then this is provided to us by a German competence network for bibliometrics through Max Planck Digital Library. In addition to that, we include open access data, and we are moving towards the direction of using open access data more and more. In addition to this licensed information, we process that and build lifetime trajectories of where each scholar has been located during their career during the past years. If you visit the scholarlymigration.org, you would see this website. So this is the solution we have came up with to quantify the mobility of scholars worldwide. And the idea behind it is pretty simple. We use institutional affiliations that scholars use in their scientific publications when they write the affiliation addresses. When we observe a change that is consistent and goes beyond at least 1 year in following the definition by United Nations for international migration that spans minimum 1 year. So if we see a consistent change in institutional affiliation of academics over 1 year, we assume and make an assumption that their residential address might have changed as well. This assumption, of course, has some limitations that I will discuss later in the panel, but this is an assumption that allows us to observe residences over time for individual scholars and for population of them. The data, as I mentioned, is provided to us by competence for a competence network for bibliometry through Mathblind Digital Library, and it spans over 16 million scholars worldwide who have published about 77 million publications. The website looks like this, and you can find a lot of information, including methods protocol and a data exploration tool. So far, there are 6 publications and 6 working papers by our group, the collaborators of SMD, and also other collaborators outside the Mathblind or other institutions who are using the scholarly migration database. On the data exploration tool that looks like this, you get to play around with the data in your browser. So without having the need to install a software or code or do an analysis on your own, you can see some included analysis, such as in migration, out migration, net migration, and the number of scholars. You get to choose 5 countries and then see different trends for them. And of course, this data allows us to have start information, so starts of migrants in each given year in a country, and flow data that are bilateral flows between pairs of countries. And you can download these 2 data flows and the start data from the data tab. There are some research that you can find the replication materials exploring different topics on the website as well. What we are going to do next in this avenue is to add gender dimension, gender differences, by inferring them based on the name. Subnational regions is one thing that we would like to add as well in the next iteration of the data to include internal mobility. And of course, we would like to move towards using open data sources. So if you scan this QR code, you can see the research that comes out of this that is briefly summarized on this poster that I'm showing you. Thank you for your attention.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ali. That's a very interesting project. And now Nicola will present the German Immigration and Remigration Panel study.
Yeah, good afternoon and welcome also from my side. It's my honor today to present to you the German Immigration and Remigration Panel study that we conducted a few years ago at the BIB in Germany. And a shout out to the whole team of the project that really did an awesome job of collecting these data. So the motivation for our project was to address the dearth of data on immigration. Like, traditionally, most data capture immigrants in the destination countries, and there is very few data that actually allows us to trace immigrants as they move abroad and might potentially return, which is of course very relevant in the context of brain drain and highly skilled migration and so forth. So, and the special trait of this project was that we actually used a population register, the German register, to trace immigrants. And you might say, well, population registers are terribly bad at tracing immigration, and they typically underestimate this. Well, this is of course correct. What the register also does in Germany is offers German citizens who deregister to state their new address in the country where they move to abroad. So we said, well, we don't attempt to capture the total flow of immigrants that move abroad. We are fine with having the idea that this is an underestimate of the total flow, but we want to use the data that the register gives us on addresses stated abroad. So basically, we split the panel in 2 sets, the immigrants and also the return migrants, because this is, of course, an easy thing to do in a register. And then said, okay, our target population is German citizens, aged 20 to 70, sampled across 81 municipalities that in the year prior recorded the highest volume of emigration and immigration of German citizens. And then we had a total of just under 48,000 addresses that split up between immigrants who deregistered in our target year between July 2017 and June 2018, and the return migrants who re-registered from returning from abroad in that same period. And so we had new addresses in Germany from the returns, and we had the new addresses stated abroad in the process of deregistration. And then we also said, well, there might be some people who actually have a mail redirect from their last address in Germany to the new destination that they moved to abroad. So we also did this as like a trial thing to send our panel or our survey invite to the last address stated in Germany of people who deregistered if they didn't state a new address abroad. And then what we did is we mailed out an invitation to participate in an online survey to these addresses, just under 50,000. And in wave 1, so this was a mail to web design, received just under 5,000 interviews from immigrants and just under 7,000 interviews from return migrants. The response rate was 0.25, is of course a little lower because not all addresses were valid. There might have been some addresses that were not in the international format of the destination country. So we assume that not all letters that we mailed out actually were received at the other end. So this is why in total we were very pleased with the response rate, especially in the years following or in the following waves, which were then online only, because we asked in the first wave at the end for an email address, and then respondents were recontacted via email for the following waves. And there you can see the response rate was always more than 65%. So it was a very good panel, and we were very pleased about the low attrition rates. So this was actually a very good thing to see, that obviously people are interested in telling us about their experience abroad. The questionnaire was about 25 minutes in duration and asked, the typical things you would like to know about the situation before the move in terms of income, household structure, and so forth, the reasons for moving, the role of the partner in the decision for moving, the intentions for staying or returning, the migration history, the situation after the move, the socioeconomic characteristics, also some personality traits. And each wave also had a special thematic focus that focused on things like work and family and COVID, because the last 2 waves were actually happening during COVID. So it also gave us a good idea to estimate the impact of the pandemic on our immigrants and the remigrants. So the destinations were covering 130 countries. The key destinations of the Germans were, not surprisingly, Austria and Switzerland, followed by other countries in Western Europe, as well as USA, North America, China, Australia, and Latin America, with Africa being, less frequently cited as the destination country. And just to give you a very brief idea of the results that we get in the survey, so we asked for the reasons for immigration, separately for the immigrants and the return migrants. You can see that there is some difference here in the motives, where career plays the most important role for both types of moves. Family is less important than lifestyle for the immigrants, whereas for the returns, lifestyle then becomes less important than family reasons. And for those returning from the UK, we asked them specifically about Brexit, and half of them said that Brexit was important in their decision to return from the UK to Germany. When you look at individual consequences of immigration, that's of course something very interesting to look at in this panel structure. You can see here that international mobility impacts positively on the standard of living and on the income, as well as on the living environment, but it somewhat has a more mixed effect on friends and neighbors, so personal contact might be compromised as a result of immigration. So to sum up, the German Immigration and Remigration Panel study, we've followed immigrants onward and return migrants for 5 waves, covering about 3 years from November 18 to November 21. We collected data on immigrants across all the destination countries in the life course perspective. And I think we have very well demonstrated how a population register can be used to establish a longitudinal survey on migration. All the waves are available as scientific use files via GESIS in Germany, and you can find more details about that on our project website that is noted here, gaps-project.de. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And finally, we have Marcella Cerruti talking about the World Migration Survey.
Okay, good morning here, good afternoon there. Thank you very much, Claudia and Sergi, for the invitation to talk about the project of the World Migration Survey. I will refer to some of the conceptual and methodological aspects of the survey that we have been developing in the context of the IUSSP panel, now called Priorities in International Migration Research. Let me share with you, why a World Migration Survey? That's the first question to ask, no? And then the thing is, how do we conceptualize migration processes? And we think that the migration processes are complex in nature, are shaped by aspirations and capabilities of agents that make decisions that are conditioned by the geographical opportunities structure that they face. So moving and staying, as Sergi said before, and manifestations of migratory agency. So we also are witnessing an increasing presence of people moving to leave behind constraints and threats, and we know less about this kind of phenomenon. So the current state of knowledge is incomplete and unbalanced. Developed migration we know much better migrations that go from the south to the north than migrations that go south to south. And this has to do with the capability of producing information in developed countries. So we know much less about the other type of flow that constitute a significant portion of all movements. It is incomplete also because most official data sources provide information, limited information on migrants' characteristics, but very little or none data on causes and consequences of migration. This is, I'm talking about official data. Then we have a significant number of binational and multi-sited international surveys that have been collected in specific regions or specific corridors, and that have provided very rich information of the process of migration. And we have, for example, the MMP and the LAMP, the projects, the MAFE projects, the MAFE, the MEDIMS, the NIDI projects. So we have a significant experience of this multi-sited survey. The problem is that they are restrained to specific corridors and using different approaches, different definitions, so they have limited comparability. So the strengths of the proposed World Migration Service is to use a similar instrument and a common comparative methodological approach. Is this idea new? No, this is not a new idea. This idea has been going on for at least 20 years, but we are like giving another push from our panel together with Philippe Farks and many other colleagues, because we think that this is an important project. So let's talk a little bit about methodological approach. The first point has to do with something that already Sergi mentioned, that to understand agency in relation to migration is imperative to count also with people who do not migrate, not only with those who do. To understand the process, we know and events, we have to have longitudinal information because it's important to have data on timing and duration. So for that, you need some kind of retrospective of biographical information. You will have to know about number of movements, durations, and reasons for migrations and return. To capture, this is a very important point, to capture the effect of the context, because we are talking about decisions that agents made within certain contexts. We also need to complement this longitudinal data with meso and macro data that relates to socioeconomic conditions, political situations, and environmental factors. Data also need to be collected on inward and on outward migration in order to understand patterns of causes and consequences of migration. So what we propose is the design is of the questionnaires is a modular structure that, depending on the prevailing migration patterns of each country, each of these modules will have different weight. There is a core module for the whole population that includes questions about even the second generation. That is something that in many countries they don't have any information on second generations. Module for the immigrant population, a module for the immigrant population, of course, and for a return population. And as I said, as I mentioned before, we have to complement these databases with meso and macro information to capture the effect of socioeconomic and political contexts that drive migration decisions. So the contribution of the World Migration Service, besides the fact of having a comparative instrument, is to better understand migrant selectivities, motivations, causes, and linkages between migration and the life course and the life chances. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions later.
Thank you very much, Marcela, and thank you for all the panelists for their presentation. I think now you can all turn on your screens again, and we can move to the first part of the discussion. So yeah, the first question that we have for you is about the practical aspect of collecting this data or using this data. So what do you think were the main challenges that were encountered in the construction or in the usage of this data, and what kind of limitations do we have in the data infrastructure as a consequence? I think, Rosa, maybe you can start.
Yes. Yeah, so regarding some of the challenges, there are obviously various administrative and ethical hurdles that are challenging to overcome and that take time to kind of sort out when linking administrative data across countries. Realizing the matches worked very well in this setting, but that can be extremely difficult. So it's often done with something that's similar to a pin. So the pin is the birth date and for more random numbers at the end. And so this could be a social security number in other settings. But these differ quite a lot across contexts. So in the Nordic setting, as I said, there are some communication across authorities, but the more different these countries are, where you want to make these links, the more tricky this is going to become. So this means that often we have these linkages between contexts that are, or these like binational data sets between contexts that are somewhat more similar than different. And obviously, what came up also in the other presentations was a bit that if people do not deregister, how do we capture them in administrative data? And so I try to explain a bit why we think that in the binational data, we have some ways of checking it, but obviously it is about registration and not about migration as such. So this can be a challenge. for instance, if the incentives are very low to deregister or something. Do I continue with the limitations or?
Yes, you have time.
Okay. So regarding some limitations, yes, obviously, so we have in this data set 2 countries that are fairly similar that we assess. So migration really between north-north. And obviously this leaves lots of question about other types of migration. So we really have to take this as maybe more a contribution of an example of what maybe some of the mechanisms might be also in different contexts. And as I said, these linkages are more often in similar contexts. So we still need to think further of what the differences might be between very different types of countries in terms of migration behavior and motivations. Also, these are registered data, so we obviously lack certain types of information, like on the reason for migration, which we, in a paper with Jan Sarela, I tried to approximate this using specifically information from before and after the move, but we have to approximate the reason for migration. So there we have approximated whether individuals move to study, to work, for family reasons, or for some other reason, but we can obviously not go into a great deal of detail there. And this, yeah, so this relates to the last point that other data sources like the MMP and so on that Marcela also mentioned can really ask the questions that they're interested in, whereas we make do with the types of information that we have that are extremely rich and yet obviously were compiled for a different purpose than research necessarily.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Ali, you're on.
Thank you for the question. So the challenges we deal with in the scholarly migration database are principally the challenges that one using digital traces and repurposing them for demographic research, and here in this panel for migration research would face. Similar challenges that colleagues using social media data, repurposing them would face. Here we have specific ones that deal with the nature of the data that are bibliometric data. For example, there is a publication delay that means it takes time for publications to go through peer review and to appear in databases such as Scopus that we are using. This means the rates that we are calculating, they have a delay that is like a picture that we are seeing of a phenomena that we would not have seen otherwise if we don't do this repurposing. But of course, this is one of the issues. And it is a challenge that we face, and we need to repurpose this large scale data to address it. I am going to mix the limitation and say it as a challenge and how we address it. Another limitation is the coverage. So this, for example, Scopus data specifically is dominated by English-speaking language publications. So that is a big limitation, and what we do to address it is complementing it with other data sources that have a better coverage of non-English speaking publications, for example. Or this is dominated by what is called weird countries, like Western, industrial, educated, rich, and democratic countries, and that underrepresents some parts of the world, like mostly global South. And the solution we are pursuing still is using data sources such as ORCID, for instance, that allows us to look at employment records. The other thing is that these are just published scholars. So if someone does not have publications indexed in Scopus, we miss out on their migration events, for instance. And one thing that relates to what Rosa was saying before is intentions. So here we have observational data, meaning we observe the behavior, we make assumptions to have an image and a picture of a phenomena that is not possible to be studied otherwise. But at the same time, we are making assumptions about people's behavior. And that is another challenge that in next steps, we are hoping to complement it with other data sources, such as surveys, for instance, to talk to the scholars and learn more about the intentions and the decision-making process that leads to a migration event. Data cleanness is one issue. For example, different people who have same names, that is called homonyms. That is something that we need to take a lot of time to address. And this is something that most data sources, digital trace data sources, have issues with in bibliometric data. We are lucky that this is a topic that is discussed a lot in bibliometrics and the science of science community. So there are solutions, but of course they are not perfect, and we work towards that direction. I will stop here so that we can discuss more about this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nicola, do you want to take the floor?
Yes, so limitations of the GAPS project, or challenges first, rather. So challenge was, of course, to access the data from the population register. We had to contact each of the 81 municipalities separately and ask them to provide us with data, and the municipalities use several different software platforms, and each had their own challenge in providing us with the new addresses abroad. So that was a procedure in itself to actually get access to these data. And then cleaning the addresses abroad and sort of trying to validate them and give them in a format where mail had a chance to actually reach the destination was also quite labor intensive on our side. And also make sure that there are no conflicts and no double households and so forth. So that was quite an effort. And also the questionnaire structure became quite complex across the waves because we had, of course, different modules for the immigrants who then stayed abroad, the immigrants who moved onward to another country, the immigrants who returned eventually. So picking up the different migration trajectories in the survey and asking the right questions at the right time in the right country, that was quite a challenge in the end for the questionnaire design. And in terms of limitations, of course, we cannot 100% shed light on the selectivity of who actually deregisters in the survey, in the register, whether this is a certain trait or a certain characteristics of people that make them more likely to deregister and others not. So there is a blind spot, of course, that all data that are captured via the register have to deal with. Also, of course, we have a focus on Germany, and there are very few comparable data sets for other countries that we could compare our data to, which would be, of course, very interesting to do. But so would be very keen on getting other countries for population registers to do a similar setup so we can have some comparative studies, which would be very nice. Of course, the sample size for 6,000 immigrants becomes quite small relatively quickly if you look at specific subgroups of migrants, whether this is skilled labor or students or retirees. Once you disaggregate the data set, then the sample size, of course, becomes and limitations, despite that it's quite a good sample to start with. So I'd say these are the key things that come to my mind at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. And Marcela, you're last.
Well, there are many significant institutional, financial, and operational challenges for this kind of endeavor, no? And a successful implementation of our migration study will first depend on political will first, and commitment on part of the states, and obviously for also cooperation and support of international organizations and donors. It is desirable for the World Migration Survey to be collected by the National Statistical Institute, and that is also a challenge to how to keep on some kind of periodicity of this type of survey. The other point, and I think is a central point also, is that how political leaders conceive migration and migrants will determine their willingness to be involved in something like this. And even though we may think that producing data will serve not only to better understand migration movements and better inform policy, unfortunately, this is not a shared value by countries. So this is a challenge. Besides these type of challenges, there are others that are more kind of technical, and these are not minor. One relates with sample designs, and we know how hard would be to count on a sampling frame where national statistical systems are weak. So for most countries, counting on data from updated census would be the best option to start building a kind of sample frame for this type of survey. Another challenge has to do with developing the specific contents of each of the modules. We know that we want to ask a number of questions and that we need to involve the expertise of international scientific community in this, obviously. But how to reach a consensus on the topics, on the questions, well, it's not going to be easy. There is always a tension when we develop a questionnaire between the interest of covering a wide range of aspects, particularly in a survey such as this one, and the feasibility and practicality to do it. So then there is another matter that has to do with the complexity, the growth and complexity of migration flows, and how to capture a significant migration that is the transient migration. So we need to develop specific kind of approach and system to capture this migration in particular. There have been some advances and proposals to do, obviously, pilot studies. We have to start with that. But up to now, with the panel, we are at the moment of developing instruments and have a kind of different ways to collect information, sample frames in countries with different levels of data. No? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. This was very interesting. And I think there's a lot of open points that I would like maybe to come back in the Q&A session ideally, but I think we should move to the second part. So how do you all think we could use the experiences for this project to expand the scope? So the first question is for Ali, Rosa, and Nicola. So like, how and under which condition do you think it would be possible to expand the design or the kind of method that were used in the project that you worked on to other populations and or countries? Once again, Rosa, if you want to start, like how much could we expand this process of linking registered data between countries?
Yes, I think that's an interesting question, and there have been other data linkage projects. So between Sweden and Norway, Sweden and Denmark, data have been linked, registered data. Also with a strong focus here on the Nordic countries because of these regulations. But there are also new interesting projects of linking data between Germany and Austria that have succeeded. And now a recent project linking data between Austria and Hungary. And so there, I heard that they really see the difference because so between all the other countries, there's some sort of homogeneity. I mean, Sweden and Finland speak very different languages, but there is a historical background and sort of they have generally institutionally been very closely linked. But Austria and Hungary, even though they're neighbors, the languages are so vastly different, and the accents on names and so on are vastly different. So this is making the linking, the matching process, or the linking process very difficult. And so this is one example where it can be quite challenging, but obviously one idea would then be to have different data sources like this and to use them as sort of examples, or to see whether there can be some matches across countries depending on the regulations and so on. Those were.
Okay. Thank you very much. Then next we have Ali. So like, of course, like I find that, of course, the natural question here is to ask, okay, how could we use digital trace data to populations that are not only academics, for example?
Thank you. This is a really good question. So, and we get it often that scholars are a subset of the highly skilled population, and they are very unique in the way they make decisions in terms of how similar or different are they to the general population in terms of the migration decisions, for instance, or the patterns of migration. This is something that we regularly face, and it is a good question to discuss, because one of the avenues that we are exploring to expand this, because at the moment we have a global coverage, and this includes about 200 countries around the world. But still, as I mentioned before, there are some coverage issues that is dominated by, for instance, 85% English language publications, while there are like only 15% that are Spanish, Italian, and other languages. And this is not what those languages are producing. So this is completely a lack of coverage. But on the other sense, in terms of expanding this a little bit beyond scholars to higher skilled population. So this is something we are exploring, and we are moving towards that direction by other complementary data sources such as LinkedIn data that allows us to look into professionals, those who have a CV created in LinkedIn, for instance. This is something that colleagues in our department are exploring, and we are trying to move towards that direction. The other source is IT sector, and this is something, for instance, that has been discussed, and in literature this has been one of the sectors, because they move a lot as well, and they are kind of like there is a need for them. So sources such as GitHub and these allow tracing if they are moving between different countries. For example, after a specific wars that has happened recently, there are studies looking at this if developers are leaving from specific countries, for instance. And of course, this is something that we are trying to move towards those directions, but the heterogeneity of digital trace data brings in more complexities. So this is something that we face. So this expansion comes with some difficulties and some complexities that we need to address. And I'm keen to discuss that more.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nicola, do you want to answer as well? So like, I'm thinking both, so like the JERF is on German citizens specifically. So like, actually my question is like, why not expanding to all people living in Germany? And also like, how do you think, like what are the necessary conditions to expand it to such a project to other countries, for example?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in theory, we could also expand this approach to foreigners who deregister to leave Germany again, although we kind of know that they are much less likely to deregister. So that could be a caveat here. but expanding it to other countries that have a population register is, of course, a very promising thing that could be explored, specifically for countries where one can cite a new address abroad when deregistering. In Germany, there was a change of rules only a few years ago that actually implemented this new address abroad. So that helped our project immensely. So expanding that to other countries and then possibly, doing it in a multi-country framework where you could also then link the addresses across different countries. That would be, of course, a very, very interesting thing to do that we hope, might gain momentum in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think, Marcela, you have the role of wrapping up a little bit here. So we talk about different designs and different methods. How do you think there are some elements of these different projects that could be used in a very wide, large-scale projects such as the World Migration Survey? Which ones, and especially I'm thinking about South-to-South migrations, how could we, what could we take from these experiences?
Claudia, let me start saying that I could not stop envying the situation depicted by Rosa and Nicola, because that is not the case for the developing countries. Having a population register that works, first having a population register, and then that works properly as it should be. This is, we are really far away from that. Obviously, if this type of population registers are great to actually define a sample frame. So it wouldn't be necessary to use even other sources. So in both cases, I think that could serve obviously for the World Migration Survey. It is very interesting, the work on immigrants, because it could serve also a check with, that studying immigration is very hard for immigrant countries. So having data and hard data from a population register and having data, for example, for a survey, could serve to check how well are we actually capturing that with a survey. That is really problematic. So it could be part of the tries and pilots that we will develop. Also, I think that would be very interesting to see how those questionnaires have worked, because it's a kind of a pilot, what type of question they included, and who kept many people interested because they have participated in several ways. So what type of question, how do they frame it? So I think that could be really interesting information. And yes, I think that's it. I think that they are wonderful sources. We could learn actually as a first step for, this is not for the World Migration Survey, but this is to improve and to start narrowing the gap on data availability between developing and developed countries. No? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are almost, we are quite on track with the timing. I'm very, very happy about that. I think before moving to the Q&A, do you want to give a final statement on what do you think should be the main objectives in data infrastructure for studying migrations as a longitudinal life course process? We can follow the usual order. So, Rosa?
Yes. As I mentioned before, potentially trying to make linkages between different types of countries so that are less similar, and incorporating potentially a third country to whatever extent that is possible, but also, as mentioned by the other panelists, kind of trying to see how can we combine register data with survey data in using it as a checkpoint or in other ways. So I think both of those avenues would be very fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ali?
Thank you. So one thing that Willekens, Massey, and Reimer mentioned in their 2016 piece in Science was the need and priority for data communication and modeling, for data collection, and for training. These three has been in the core of our work in a scholarly migration database. So we are trying to showcase the data and unlock proprietary data and publicly share it. We have regular training sessions in that happens at the PhD level, but it is open to master students too, to train them how they can repurpose this type of data and also social media data and other digital trace data to allow us to expand our coverage. So these are the things that we are moving towards them, but we need help with the younger generation to join these courses, to learn about these avenues that we are exploring and help us actually expand these coverages.
Thank you very much. Nicola?
Yeah, I would say that we really need to focus on expanding longitudinal data sets on international migration. As much as we need a basic understanding of south-north migration, and I'm fully with Marcella there, I also think that the longitudinal data are required for us to gain a better understanding of migration processes, since it's no longer a once-in-a-lifetime move and trajectories become more complex, and we really want to get into the nuts and bolts of understanding what drives migration and what are the individual consequences of it, and how are couples and household members interlinked in making decisions. And here, internet panel data are really crucial. So I think we need to harness existing data in new ways and combining existing data sets in new ways to actually make progress on that front. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And finally, Marcella.
Now I would follow Nicola's idea. No, a dynamic longitudinal data is obviously needed, but we also need to combine this data with contextual information, because in order to understand how the migration decision process are made over time, we need to have also, it's not just an individual decision, but also the structure of opportunity that is perceived by agents. So we need to have that type of information. But again, I have this opportunity because every time that I have an international opportunity, I do emphasize this. We need to reduce disparity in terms of data availability across regions. That is a must. And it's a must in the three areas that data is needed, no? Because we need data from a scientific point of view to account and to understand the migration processes, but we also need data to inform policy and to provide evidences on how migrants are socially included and they have access or not to rights in the destination countries. And also we need information to change the anti-immigrant narrative. So in all these three significant spheres, we really need to reduce disparity on data availability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all of you for these very interesting presentations, discussion, and reflections. Now I think we can move to the Q&A. So first of all, I would like to ask you, the panelists, if you have questions to ask to each other, or if there are specific things that you would like to expand a little bit before I take the questions from the attendees. Okay. If you don't, then We have one question from the chat from Abed Montpe. Asks to Marcella Cerruti, we do not know when and from where millions of migrants are moving. So first of all, on which variables will you collect data? And second, who will be your target from which you will collect those data to capture diverse migration effects?
Well, where do they go? Supposedly you will capture that with a survey. That's the purpose of where people are going. And what was it, the other question? I'm sorry.
So who will be your target from which you collect those data? So
target is everyone in the country that you are collecting, because the idea is to capture people not only migrants, but also people who are not migrants. So you capture both. And something else? In any case, there is talking about topics and what would we ask. There is obviously, this is something that is a work in progress, but there is a document that is in the IUSSP site. I think that someone put the reference that you can check there, because it is much better explained and will not take so much time here.
Thank you very much. We have a question to Ali from Halal Abazi Shavazi, asking, thank you for the interesting and stimulating research you are conducting. This is from the Q&A panel, if you want to look at it as well. Would you please let us know if you have found patterns and trends of movements of scholars between Global South and North, and if these data are shown by demographic characteristic, age, gender, etc.?
Thanks a lot for the kind words. We have in the list of publications that are under the research tab in Scholarly Migration Database website, we have two publications. One is dealing with gender, and that is the differences. So I can tell you briefly that women move shorter distances among scholars as well. And in a follow-up to that we are going to present in EPC, upcoming EPC, women opt more among scholars for internal migration than international. So in the paper that is on the website, we show that they move shorter distances when it comes to international migration. And then in a follow-up, we show that they move more internally than internationally. That is, going to be presented. For demographic characteristics, I must say that we infer gender using names. That is another limitation that is binary, because it is based on terrain data, so it does not include self-identification, for instance, in gender and or non-binary. In terms of age, unfortunately, there are not many sources covering biological age of scholars as far as we are seeing so far. Of course, there are some smaller scale surveys. Sometimes their data is not accessible at all, but we infer age based on academic age and based on the production and publications that they have and the collaboration structure. We infer at which stage of the career one is, if, for instance, they are supervising younger generations or not. Through this, we have proxies for that, but the best ideal scenario would be to have access to the biological age, for instance. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually have a very small follow-up question concerning the gender assignment. I don't know how to say that. Do you think there might be an issue? So like, I'm guessing that the data that they used to train the algorithm are mostly, again, from English-speaking countries. So what happens for Global South countries? Like, is there a bigger error for that?
Thank you very much. This is a really good question. And what happens is, because the data is trained based on text, and usually these are again dominated by English language from Western countries, what happens is the gender inference works best for, let's say, German names, for English names, or for names that comes from Western countries. What happens is, one thing that we, with colleagues, for instance, we are looking at is including those whose gender is not possible to be inferred. So having males and females, and then a third category, unknown. And I must say, this is unfortunately not yet published. So we are going to present it for the first time in PAA. And there we show that actually their trends are much different than both males and females. So one question that we are still wondering about is, who are we excluding with this type of inferences? For the moment, the treatment we have come up with is to have a specific category for them, not to exclude them, because the literature usually just excludes them if they cannot infer a gender. Like they say men, women, and then they exclude the rest. For the moment, we are including it as a separate category just to say this is the behavior we are observing. But the best treatment would be actually to come closer to the sources that would allow us to have a proper identification of like gender inference for, let's say, non-English speaking text. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From the Q&A section, there is a question by Elizabeth Goldburn asking if the panelists think that the recent apparent increase in net migration into the UK is influenced significantly by the changes in counting entry and exit. So previously there was free movement in EU countries. Now people moving to live, work, or study in the UK have to have a visa. So of course there is a change in how much people will register their migrations. Do you think this impacted how we assess migration inflows and outflows? Someone want to?
Well, I don't know the specificities of the visa regulations, but what we've seen in our data, of course, is that the change of sentiment in the UK surrounding Brexit has definitely impacted migration flows, with foreigners who were residing in the UK leaving again, either returning to the home country or moving onwards to another Anglo-Saxon country. I know that from our survey, but also just anecdotally, I know a couple of colleagues who moved on to the US or Australia or elsewhere because of Brexit. So, and one could assume, following, Hein de Haas and others, if there is a tighter visa regulation, then that limits circularity and increases the rate of, or decreases the likelihood of moving to the UK, but also decreases maybe the rate of those who are in the UK and would like to stay to then return temporarily to home country. So. Yeah, I'm not an expert on the UK side.
Yeah, I'm guessing the question referred also to what both you and Rosa mentioned. So like the structure of incentives to register and register. So of course, for example, I am still registered in Italy, although I don't live there, and I haven't lived there for a very long time, because of course there's no reason for me to do. If I had to ask for a visa for Spain, where I live right now, probably I would necessarily have to register and register. So I think that's where the question was aiming to a little bit. And I guess, so from what Rosa was saying, the people tend to register, and they register quite a lot from Finland and Sweden.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So in the Nordic setting, because you really need this PIN number or social security number in settings for so many things for your daily life, very high incentives to do so. So, I mean, I guess exactly as Claudia was saying, that considering that you really have to get a visa now in the UK, it could lead to less undercounting, but obviously the flows are also changing, as we've discussed. So this will maybe be hard to disentangle when focusing on this setting in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you.
May I ask something? I have this burning question for Rosa, and this relates to so we know that now not only in the Nordic countries registered data has been used for research purposes, so we see this in other countries, Anglo countries, also the south of Europe, and so on. But the next level is different countries sharing the registers, which is basically what you have shown here. And you were telling that there's even beyond the Nordic countries, other countries also sharing between them information from registers. So my burning question is like, what are the conditions under which this is starting to happen? So what actors are involved in here and how you make this possible in a way?
Yeah, this is a good question and a very important one. I mean, it's case by case. So for in the different countries, these ethical and different matching systems are handled differently. So this makes the linking extremely difficult. So in Sweden, for instance, first you ask for ethical permission from an ethical review board, and only then are you allowed to contact the statistical agency, so Statistics Sweden, who will tell you what is possible to do with the data and will try to help you further. In Sweden, in Finland, by contrast, this is done together. So this is one process instead of two. I don't know the details for the collaborations in Germany and Austria, but so this country specificity makes it extremely difficult to link across countries. And so this is where the complexity comes in, because there are also additional ethical concerns. Obviously, we're not using only the data in one country, but in two countries and so on. Yes, I mean, I think it's an important avenue to try to take. I know that for health data, for instance, there are some discussions that in the EU it would be really important to be able to have information on different medical visits. That's even more sort of sensitive data. But so there are ideas that this is, however, important despite all the ethical concerns, and that we need to find safe and good ways of doing this within the legal framework and within the possibilities, of course.
Thank you. And if I might ask a very quick question to Nicola. Earlier you mentioned briefly that a reason to only pick German citizens for the GERFs was that non-German citizens have lower the registration rate, like tend to register less. So like my question is like, how could be the registrations incentivized? Like what would make people more willing to register? Or like, is it a matter of it's just perceived as useless, or is it a hard bureaucratic procedure that as a consequence also feels useless? Like what do you think could be done there to facilitate the process of collecting information?
Yeah, I think in terms of positive incentives, like incentivizing deregistration is probably tricky. I mean, what the Baltic states, I think it's Lithuania, has done is they tax everyone who is basically living in Lithuania, and they have to continue paying tax if they don't deregister. Yeah. And suddenly, of course, Lithuania has brilliant data on immigration because everyone has an incentive to not pay the tax, so they deregister. That's one option.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I think we are on time with the end. So that if there's no more question, I think Nico, if you want to conclude.
Yes, I would love to do that. So thank you to the organizers and the the moderator and the panelists and the audience for a great webinar. I think it was very rich in the topics that we discussed, and the topic was well chosen: data infrastructures for the longitudinal analysis of international migration is of course key. Data are the lifeblood of our discipline, and we saw some very diverse data sets being discussed. There are limitations, challenges, but also ways to expand. And we should indeed learn in all these different approaches from each other and collaborate and collect new data, combine old data with newer data, surveys, registers, repurpose data. One thing that struck me also was what Ali mentioned, also involved the younger generations in using all these new data. Well, all these topics are very close to the heart of the IUSSP. International migration is a very important topic to us. We have no less than 2 scientific panels working on this very broad field. There's lots to be done. That's what we have learned today, and the IUSSP is ready to do its part. So we are looking forward to the results of those 2 panels, and also, of course, to other colleagues. Sergi already said it in the beginning. Stay tuned to what IUSSP and its panels is doing by checking our website. And a final word is that the next one of the next events of the panel on lifetime migration will be at the European Population Conference in June in Edinburgh, Scotland, where also early career scholars will have a special place, which is a very great decision by the panel. So we're all looking forward to that. So a big thank you again to all of you, and looking forward to much more to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.